is my first Zoom class that I've taught, so hopefully it will go smoothly. At least I know I'm familiar with the materials. Just a little bit of me. I have been in the nonprofit world for about 30 years and have been focusing on grant writing for probably about the last 15. I have several longtime clients or steady clients, and I've also done some small projects as well. I used to be on the dark side, as some grants writers will say, as in I was development director, special events director, things like that. And took a little break in my career to have my children. And when I went back to nonprofit, I was volunteering doing grant writing. And it was amazing to me because I realized that if you focus on grant writing, you can really raise a whole lot of money. And I also found that I just had a passion for writing and being able to tell my organization's story through grant applications. So this is my new passion. This is what I love to do as far as not-for-profit work. And I hope that I can impart some of my knowledge to you and help you out on your journey today. So to get going.
And Amy, oh, I totally forgot the polls.
Oh, okay.
We're going to look at the cute little sloth while I launch two polls. The first of which, the library loves its data, so we always need to collect this information. If you can in fact see the poll, if you would reply telling us how you learned about this, that would be great. And if you can't see the poll, no worries, but I guess actually the answers are via SLPL email, SLPL website, SLPL flyers, social media, from a friend, SLPL staff, or other. So, if you can't see the poll and want to just shout in the chat how you heard about it, that would be awesome. But it looks like 93% have voted. So I'm going to go ahead and end the polling on that. You'll be fascinated to see the results. Email and website seem to be the big winners, so that's exciting. And now I think I'm going to, do I do this? And then I do this. And I go to the next poll, relaunch polling, continue. And maybe I failed to do the other poll. So I apologize. May that be the worst thing that happens today. Closing the polling. Here's Amy.
Okay. Let's see. How do I get this off my screen? Sorry. All right. So I wanted to give you just a little overview of what I'll be talking with you guys about today. First of all, why you should pursue grants and the different types of grants and grant makers that are out there. We'll talk a lot about planning and preparation and research, which are critical to this. And then getting into the writing, some of the do's and don'ts and tips that I can share with you that I've learned through my experience and learned from other experts in the field that might help you. And then I will wrap it up with some other resources that you all might find of benefit. Now, I know you're wondering why I have this adorable baby sloth hanging in front of you. Last year at the Grant Professionals Association conference in DC, the keynote speaker, his first slide had a baby animal on it. And he said that there was a study out, which I did go and find in 2015, that said that viewing cute things helps improve your focus and your concentration. So I thought we all need a little bit of that. Why not? And I have to tell you that when I was researching cute baby animals to put the pictures in here, it just made me feel 100 times better. So hopefully these cute little animals will help you out and not distract you. So three reasons why you should pursue grants. First of all, there is a lot of money out there. In 2019, foundations awarded over $75 billion in grants. This is double what it was in 2014, and it was also a significant increase from 2018. So there is a lot of money out there, and if you're not asking for it, then there's money left out on the table. Grants exist for almost any kind of nonprofit. You could be a well-established one, you could be a brand new one, you could be trying to start a not-for-profit. So really there is funding out there for every level of organization and every type of organization. You just need to do the proper research. And then you can also fund just about any kind of need. A lot of this would be project specific, but even any kind of organization. I've gotten a grant from the Roller Skating Foundation of America. I have seen grants for yoga, for restoring old fishing boats in Maine, for ski lessons or ski things like that. So there are all sorts of grants out there. You just have to go out and find what matches what your focus area is. So 3 things to consider when you're applying for grants. First of all, grant writing is hard work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of preparation. It is not just an instant kind of fundraising where you're going and sitting across the table from somebody and asking them for money. In fact, only about 35% of funders fund about, well, I'm sorry. So there was a poll, and 35% of fundraisers funders who responded said they only funded 50% of the applications they receive each year. So it's exponential. If you apply for 2 grants, chances are you may only get 1. If you apply for 100 grants, you're increasing your chances of receiving an award. So it does take a lot of time and effort, and you have to understand that the more that you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. The other very important thing to consider, and I really like to emphasize this, is that grants cannot be your bread and butter. I know there are a lot of startup organizations or young organizations or even very well established who think, oh, let's go get a grant for that, or I need to get a grant and then I can start this. Well, as you can see by this graph, that grant writing really needs to be a part of a comprehensive development program. So as you can see, the largest, and this is generally across the country, that about 72% of income usually comes from individuals. Foundations would be the next largest source of income, which would be foundation, 16%, and then corporations and bequests. And the corporations number, I think, is a little low because it excludes corporate foundations. And so those fall into that 16%. So really, depending on how you do your financials, corporations and foundations might be a little bit more even. But it's just really important to understand that you need to have a comprehensive development program with grant writing as an important part of that in order to be able to sustain your program or your organization. The third thing to consider is that grant writing is a marathon and not a sprint. So grants are not like an ATM. You don't submit the application and the money spits out back at you. It is a long process. There are any number of different cycles to know when you're going to be getting the funding. So for instance, when you're doing your research, if there's a funder that only has 1 grant cycle, you can count that it might be 6 months, 8 months, maybe even a year before you know if you get that award. If a funder has 3 grant cycles, or 4 grant cycles, 1 every quarter, then you will probably get your results a lot sooner. So you really need to understand that. So if it's a program that you want to fund that is starting in 4 months, grant writing is probably not the first place that you go to fund that program. If it's starting in a year, then absolutely that's what you can do. Or you can plan the program and start it when you receive funding. But just understand that it's going to take a while before you get a response. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of grant makers, because there are several different ones out there. So the first one is donor advised funds. And this, you may be more familiar with the St. Louis Community Foundation or Youth Bridge Community Fund. So these are places where individuals or families can create their own sort of charitable fund that they can make their disbursements from. This is a huge benefit for the donor because those are protected from taxes, but it's also a great way for people to be able to give their money away and not have to manage all of the requests or sending out the checks, things like that. So My advice on donor advised funds is that you make yourself familiar with Community Fund or Youth Bridge or any of the other financial institutions that handle donor advised funds, because those people, once they're familiar with you, then they can share your information with their donors as their interest comes up. So the officers at these organizations will know that this donor really likes to fund education. This one really likes to fund animals. So they would present your organization to them as a possibility if they're looking for options for making donations. Then there's also corporate foundations, which I think people are very aware of. They're big: Emerson, Enterprise Leasing, things like that. These foundations do typically rely on their disbursements to be based on what their income is for the year. So if it's a really bad year for the company, it might be a bad year for giving. So it's good to sort of keep on top of those trends. Next year is going to be very interesting to see what happens with corporate foundations, because I think the fallout from the pandemic is really going to be a little bit more apparent then. I think that's more long range than the immediate economic impact that we've all experienced. Then there's also company giving programs. The Boeing Employee Community Fund is a prime example of this. This is where a corporation will invite their employees to make a donation to their fund, and typically the employees then get to decide where their funds are going. So it's good to do a lot of research on all of these different corporate givings opportunities so that you know where you might best fit. And typically, just like a foundation, corporate foundations and the company giving programs will all have guidelines that outline what their focus areas are. Then there's family foundations. These can be small or large. I think most of them are a little bit on the smaller side, unless you're, a Rockefeller or something like that. But these are usually foundations where the family is still involved in some manner. It may not be the people that actually set up the foundation. It could be their grandchildren, their children, relatives, things like that. And I have found that family foundations are the easiest to start developing relationships with, or, well, let me rephrase that. Not the easiest, but that's where you can reap the most benefits from a family foundation if you can make a relationship with somebody on those board of trustees. They're a little bit closer to the boots on the ground, I think. Then there's also independent foundations. The Dana Brown Charitable Trust would be an example of this. While Dana Brown set up the trust, it is now run by US Bank, and their bank employees are the officers and trustees, and they are charged with carrying out Dana Brown's wishes, but they are not related to the family. And then there's also your government, state, and local funders. And those all typically have websites that you can go and find information on what their giving is, et cetera. So while there's many types of grant makers, there's also many different types of grants. Capacity building is a really important grant area that I think a lot of people overlook, maybe because they just don't understand it. So this is where it's a grant that would help your organization build their capacity. So it could be hiring staff to run a program. It could be technology, transportation, things that would help your organization do what you do better. Then there are capital grants, which I think most people are familiar with. That would be for renovation or a building or purchasing a building or something like that. Then there's also challenge and matching grants, and these are different. They're sort of used interchangeably, but they are quite different. So a challenge grant would be if I said, I am going to give you $10,000, and you can leverage that with your donors and say, we have a donor who has challenged us to raise $10,000 to meet what their $10,000 is. So that donor is going to give you the $10,000 no matter what, but you can use that to help leverage other donations. Matching gifts are the same premise, where the original donor is wanting to help maximize your gain, but this is more like, I will give you $10,000, I will match dollar for dollar up to $10,000. So each one has its merits. Challenge grants are a little bit more attractive because they're going to give you the $10,000 no matter what. They just want it to be able to help springboard your other fundraising. But matching gifts also create a sense of urgency and fun. Those are the kind of things where you might do a thermometer or something like that to see what your progress is. Then there are also endowment grants. These are not as popular out there. I have found that mostly they're larger funders that will do endowment grants. But if you have the opportunity to try and build an endowment, it's a really cool thing. It's sort of like a rainy day fund. It's a chunk of money that's set away that is usually restricted for either a certain project or program, or it could just be for overall operating funds. And typically, unless there's an emergency or a disaster, you do not touch that principal. But then any of the money that is earned off of that principal, that's what you can use throughout the year to fund your operations or a program or something like that. One of my organizations has an endowed scholarship fund. So while we can't touch the initial gift, every year the returns on that gift we can allocate for scholarships. So if it's a great market year, we have a lot of funds to give away or scholarships to give away. If not, then that's kind of a bummer. So it's a good rainy day fund, but it is also fluctuating with the stock market. The biggest, the best, most wonderful grants out there are the general support, unrestricted or operating grants. And these are, these are the things that help you keep your lights on. They help you pay your staff. They're not the pretty, exciting programs and projects that a lot of funders want to see, but they're so very important. And there is a huge movement in the grants world among grant writers to really educate funders on the importance of just providing general support, because we can't do the work that on the ground if we don't keep the doors open and we don't keep the electricity on. And I think through this pandemic, the conversation has really opened up a lot more about that. So I am hopeful that there will be a lot more unrestricted funding coming our way in the future. And then there's the shiny new toy, the program and project grants that are, that funders love to put their name on something or attach their themselves to something that's new, that's more impact, and you can really see the results immediately. And these are wonderful. I mean, especially if you're starting a new program or project, it is great to get those types of grants so that you can show them this is what your vision is and how you're helping the people or what your organization is supporting. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what a grant professional actually does, because as you can see, only about 10% actually goes into writing the grants. And I think that is one thing that is a little eye-opening if you're new to the field. The really important stuff is the 90% that you do before you start writing the grant. It starts with research, it's program design. And I really want to stress, I know a lot of small organizations, if you're writing the grants, you could also be the executive director, and you could be the program director, and you could be the development director, and you could be the janitor. I mean, you could be doing all of those things. If you're not, if you have the benefit of there being more than just you there, being a part of designing a program, I think is very important for grant writers, because you're the one that's going to have to go out and seek funding, and you can ask the questions that help them design the program as far as outcomes and what evaluation is going to be and things of that nature. And along that line, also creating budgets. Now, there's usually an overall organization budget that either the board or the executive director, they're really the ones that determine that. But each different program or project should have their own budget, and you can be a part of designing those budgets, because you know that you're going to be asking for those funding and you're going to have to answer to those budget questions. As a grant professional, you also monitor the programs that are funded. If you're in a large organization, there probably will be a program director or coordinator that would be able to do the monitoring and report back to you. In smaller organizations, it's going to be pretty much up to you that if you raise money to start a speaker series, you need to make sure that speaker series actually happens. I've had an instance where I got money for a program, and I thought the organization was still pretty young, but they did have a person that was running these programs, and I failed to stay on top of them. And when it came around time to report on that grant, I found out that they hadn't done the program. They'd only done half of the program because there was this change in staff and they were too busy. So if I had been more involved, then I would have known that. And I've never done that again, I can tell you that. You also provide reports to funders, as I alluded to. I really think it's important, if you're the person that's writing the grant, that you are either preparing the reports or you're very involved in those reports, because you are the one who knows best what you put into the application and what the outcomes were supposed to be, and what you need to report back on. I have a collaboration with a program director where she gets an email whenever a report is due that outlines what the outcomes that I put in the application are. And so she has an idea of what she needs to be gathering for me and what information is there. This one might be a little bit unusual for if you're strictly grant writing, because I think a lot of grant writers are introverts, or they feel that they're introverts. But I believe it is critical for grant writers to develop and maintain relationships with funders, especially if you're a small organization. You cannot rely on the executive director, or maybe if you have a development director, to make all of those relationships. And I do feel like relationships between grant writers and funders are a little bit different from major gifts donors or even individual donors, because it's a very much more of a back and forth with set guidelines. And as a grant writer, you need to understand very clearly what the foundation is asking for. And so building a relationship with the trustees or with the program officer, if it's a larger funder, I think is really critical. And it also can help you with the grant process. So reaching out to a program officer or a foundation officer before you start writing the application, just to make sure that what your program is in line with what their focus area is, but also to ask questions. Sometimes I will ask a question that I already know the answer to, but I just want an opportunity to be able to open that door and make that relationship, so that when they get my application out of 50, 100, or 1,000 others, they'll say, oh, I remember talking with Amy, and she had they had a really cool project. So it just is something that can give you maybe a little bit of a leg up. And then also keeping up to date on funding trends and funder interests. I will tell you that deadlines for grants are never set in stone. They can change from year to year. Large foundations or corporate foundations can restructure their focus areas, and they don't really feel it necessary to inform everybody else. It's sort of on us to make sure that we do the yearly research to make sure that we're still in line with that. I'd probably say a dozen different funders who have changed their deadlines or changed their focus area. And, some of them, I think actually more so now, especially with things being able to be online, they are putting it out there, but they're not necessarily, shouting and waving to you saying, hey, guess what? We changed our focus area. Because it also invites them to have a flood of applications. So really keeping up to date on those trends is important. I like to do as much research as I can on funders. There's the Gateway Center for Giving in St. Louis is an organization that is sort of a group for funders, and they do meet the donor panels several times a year. I just had one about a month ago that was online, and I wasn't going to attend because I was very familiar with all three funders, but I thought, it's always a good idea. Well, sure enough, one of them was the Delta Dental Health funder. And I thought, well, they don't really have anything that they would be giving to us. But I found out that they do donations of dental hygiene items, and we could use that in my organization. And so we submitted an application and we got dental hygiene items. So if I hadn't gone to that Meet the Donor, I never would have known. So, doing Google searches, finding out who else they fund, Are they going to be, when we all get to do things together again, are they going to be at a ribbon cutting? Is there going to be a ceremony here? Is there an event that's honoring them or that would involve them? Any way that you can sort of get out there and make relationships with the funders. So after all that 90%, then you get to the grant writing, which is the fun stuff, but it's only about 10% of what you're actually doing. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. I hope I'm not racing through this too quickly, and to see if there were any major questions in the chat, Lisa.
So I have not seen any questions, so feel free to type up a question if you want, but I did find my other poll, so I will ask you guys some questions.
Great.
This is Amy's first time doing this via Zoom, although she's a pro at doing it in person. This is my second hosting Zoom thing, so thank you for being my mini guinea pigs. Just gets better and better, doesn't it? So here was the question we were going to ask you. Just basically, you know, how much do you know about grant writing? So feel free to jump in there. This will be the interaction portion of the program.
Oh, lots of people wanting to get into it. That's great.
Excellent.
You're in the right place, I hope. And I hope this will help you out.
All right, and as our votes come in, it's like election day all over again. We have a question, are funds ever denied based on project outcome? And someone else asking about the Meet the Donors event, and I was going to pull up Gateway Center for Giving's website, so I'll put that in the chat, their website and information about that, but it's Gateway Center for Giving. Regina and I attended as well, and they're always excellent.
And I think I have their website also on one of the slides coming up too, but having it directly in the chat.
Better too many times than not enough. So yes,
exactly.
Are funds ever denied based on project outcome?
I would say yes, if you don't have outcomes or if your outcomes are unrealistic. So, and they have to be very specific outcomes too. It can't be just that a very kind of broad, vague, we're going to give people shoes. It should be, how many shoes are you going to get? How are you, things like that. So being very specific in your outcomes and your outputs will definitely influence whether or not you will be funded.
All right, and then we have a question, can you share tools, websites, et cetera, for finding and filtering funders based on focus? I'll jump in super quick and just plug, we subscribe to Foundation Directory Online here at St. Louis Public Library, Kirkwood Public Library, St. Charles City County Library also subscribe. In normal times, you can come here to the library and sit at our computers and do searching. It's one of our few virtual resources that is not available remotely. But these not being normal times, we have a couple of options, especially while the building is closed. We have created a Google form that people can fill out, and I think I sent the link in the email yesterday, but otherwise you all know how to find me. And you can fill out the Google form and we'll do research and send you search results. And then option 2 is there is a link to Foundation Directory Online Essential, which is a scaled back version of Candid's product, which I can provide you that link and then you can do some searching on your own. So those are the results. Those are the options that are available through the library. Amy, what else is out there?
I actually, coming up in a little bit, I have a whole slide with a bunch of different funders, or not funders, but search engines that you all can access, and somewhat of my opinions on them, and some costs too. So
cool. And I'll put in more information about the library resources in the chat. And someone asked if grant funds are earmarked for certain categories, how difficult is it to redirect them?
That is kind of a case-by-case basis. If you received a grant for one specific thing and you ended up not being able to do that or needing to redirect it, that's a conversation that you have to have directly with the foundation. And I would do that before you redirect the funds, because it is quite possible that they would ask for them back. I have not had to redirect funds, but I have had instances where um, we either were not able. Well, actually, that's wrong. We did. So I had gotten a project funded for our math department at Logo School that I work with, and part of that was buying Chromebooks. And after we received the grant funding, we also received 27 Chromebooks. And so we no longer needed to buy them. So I called the program officer and explained it to her and said we would like to redirect those funds to something else within this project, and they were totally fine with it. So I think for the most part, as long as you're still aligning with what the funder, what their interests are, and you're very upfront with it with them, then it should not be a problem. And I cannot tell you one instance, although I'm sure it's happened, where a funder has asked for funds back. I think mostly that happens if you get to the end of the grant period and you did not spend any of the funds or had no outcomes. But I would say normally there's a fairly good reason for that.
Okay, and I don't see any more questions. If you want to keep rolling, and I'll drop some links in the chat.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about planning, preparation, and research. And this is really the nuts and bolts of grant writing. Obviously doesn't involve a whole lot of writing, but I have to emphasize that this is so important to do all of this first before you start writing. It will make your life so much simpler once you do get down to the writing, and it will help you prepare much better proposals and that are set up for success. So there is a handout I think Lisa has shared with you or will share with you, and it is a checklist to know whether or not you're grant ready. So I pulled out some of the highlights of these. And what I do and what I highly recommend is when you're going through your grant readiness checklist and you're compiling this information, keep it all in one place. Keep it in an electronic file so that you can just pull it up and print it out, or you can cut and paste, because it takes a lot of time to go hunting down information. And sometimes if you're on a really tight deadline, you can use every extra minute you have. So before you can even think about writing a grant, you need to have a mission statement, which I think everybody understands what that is, but it's the core purpose and the reason that your organization exists. You should also have a vision statement. And that is, if your mission is achieved, what's going to happen? What's the success going to be? And I think it's really important to be thinking about that, because that's sort of like a long range thing rather than just the immediacy. You should have a written down history of your organization. If you're just starting up, then it should be, why are you starting this organization? Why do you think it's important? This could be a chronological one. It does not have to be every single little thing, but just an overview of how you started and where you are and how you got there. This is particularly helpful for some organizations that may start with a certain purpose and then change. Like, I can't remember what organization they turned into, but there was not-for-profit that was funding the polio vaccine. And when polio was eradicated, they still had all of these funds. And so they changed what they did to a different type of organization, which is fantastic. Now, that doesn't happen very often, but I have found that it's really important to have the history. And as you will find, as you get into grant writing, with most applications now being online, and then they are character limited or word limited, it is good to have a few different versions of all of these things. I have 5 different versions in different character limitations, ranging from 150 characters to 2,000 characters for one of my organizations. And again, it's just like a time saver to be able to cut and paste that into an application. You should have a listing of your board of directors, including their titles and corporate affiliation, your last completed IRS 990, and if you're a smaller organization, that would be a 990 EZ. Those are typically for if you're between $50,000 and $200,000 budget. And all of those are acceptable for any foundation. You should have your 501c3 letter always at the ready. I used to, back in the put it in the mail days, I would have a stack of 501c3 letters just that I could just stick and shove in the envelope every time I had an application. You should also have the financial statements for the last 2 fiscal years. And again, if it's a brand new organization, you may not have this, but there are a lot of funders who want to sort of see a history of what your organization has done financially. And so just having that, again, these are all time savers for you down the road. Your current fiscal year budget and expenditures also are very important. I sort of skipped by that one. If it's possible for you to be able to regularly get your monthly financials from your executive director or board, that would be really helpful instead of having to chase it down. Because some funders do want to know, okay, well, this is what your budget, but where are you 6 months in? How are you doing? It's also good to have a whole description of the demographics of the clients you serve. This is something that's, can roll off your tongue probably, but being able to have it written down very specifically, and not just that, 98% are Black or 27% are homeless. It should sort of also include how that rates with your community. So rather than just stating who you're serving, it's showing the overall landscape of the community, and that sort of gives more weight to the importance of what the work you're doing is in your community. And then also the program description. Now, if you have one program, if it's just your organization program, this is pretty easy. Again, I do it in different character limitations, but if you have multiple programs within your organization, do one for every single one of those. Because again, when it gets down to the crunch time, having that program description at the ready is important. And also, really importantly, is that it creates uniformity in your message. Because if you're recreating the wheel with every application, you could be changing your story just a little bit every single time. And over time, that can water down what your organization is, the message that you're trying to share. So having all of this written down and updated every year really helps you with your story and your messaging, and keeps it all very concise. Then there's proposal planning, and I also like to call this proposal design. I know I talked a little bit earlier about if it's possible for you to be a part of designing new programs as a grant professional, and because they really do go hand in hand. So anything that they're doing with the program design is probably going to go into your proposal. So in 1 or 2 sentences, you should be able to summarize your project idea. This is similar to an elevator speech that you would do for just your organization. It's just something very concise that says exactly what the project is going to do. Then defining the problem or the need. And this is really important to define the need of the people that you're serving, or the constituency that you're serving, not the needs of your organization. So I don't need a van to get my clients to their dental appointments. My clients need transportation to get to their dental appointment. So you really need to make sure that you are focusing on whoever or whatever it is that you are trying to accomplish, so that becomes clear to the funder. It's not your organization that needs the funding, it's the people or the constituents that you're serving that need it. Then what changes do you intend to achieve? So it goes along with outputs and outcomes, but it's like, what's the change you want to affect because of this program? By getting this van, this van will enable our clients to get to their dental appointments, which will reduce the amount of rotten teeth that happen that would cause them to miss work. So it's all of the things that go along with what the work is that you're trying to do. There's also the steps that you will take to make these changes. So there's often many steps in order to get to your outcomes. And so you need to be very clear with what those steps are. Also, any opportunities for partnering. In this day and age, collaborations are really important to funders. And sometimes it's just not possible. You're the only person doing this work. And so that's it. And that's totally fine. But if there are other organizations that you could partner with, or that you could highlight, that is really important, because funders, especially with limited dollars and many, many not-for-profits, I think there's something like 13,000 not-for-profits in the St. Louis area. They want to make sure that they're investing their funds in something that is not being done elsewhere. And so if there are other organizations that are doing similar work to yours, it might not be a bad idea to see if there could be a collaboration to make a stronger proposal and get those funding. And then evaluation is critical, and that really has to be a part of any program design. How are you going to measure this? Are you going to do pre and post surveys? Are you going to have paper surveys? Will you have intake sheets? All of the things that would help you collect the data to know whether or not your program is going to be successful. And then estimated total costs. So this is going back to helping to write the budget. And it's I think it's very important to success to realize that you need to put everything in that budget. And I'm talking from the from the actual part of the program to the staff that's going to be investing in it, to the technology you might need, to the supplies, and especially put in everything as if you had to pay for it. So I have several programs that have been funded that part of it is in-kind goods. But what if that in-kind donor goes away? You're going to have to pay for that. So you need to explain to them, this is exactly how much it costs to run this program. You can have on the side, as far as income, you can have in kind for income so that they can see that part of your project is being funded by others. But it's really important to make sure that you have the whole big picture of what the program cost is. So after you've done all of this planning and everything, it's time to do research. And I know that the what you want to rush to is the research. Find the funders, who's out there. I really strongly suggest that you do all of the other stuff first and have that full program in mind when you go to look for funders. Because if you go looking for funders first, you run into the danger of possibly mission creep. Be like, well, this funder funds something that's similar to our program, so maybe we could change the program so we can get the money. And to me, that's chasing dollars, and it's dangerous because you need to stay true to your mission and to your vision and to what the focus of the program is, and don't change your program in order to get funding, because that really lessens the efficacy of your program and the fidelity of it. So after all that's done, now you go to do your research and you build your grants calendar. And as I said, sometimes it takes months, even a year, to get an award. So building out a full year grants calendar is really important, not only for your own time, especially if you're wearing 15 different hats in your organization, but also just understanding what the deadlines are and when you need to start. So this is kind of an example of my grants calendar, how I have it set up. And it's an Excel spreadsheet. I do use a program called Smartsheet, which is kind of a fancy Excel spreadsheet program. It allows you to attach files, to set reminders. So when I have a date that I'm supposed to be starting to work on an application, it sends me an email saying you need to start this application today. It's sort of, everybody has their own system for how they don't miss deadlines, and mine is a little convoluted, but it really works for me. So that's why I love Smartsheets, because it sends me that email. So I divide it up into funder and then start date. That's when you want to start the application. And I usually do that at least 4 weeks before the due date. At least, that's what my goal is. If it's a more complicated application, I may do 6 weeks, because I also want to allow time to be able to get information from programs people or leadership for this application. So you need to not allow yourself not just the time to write the application, but to make sure you can get all the information that you need for that. Then the submit date, and then the final deadline, so you know when that deadline is. And I typically do not share the final deadline with the people that I need the information from. I usually do my submit date so that they are not running up against the actual deadline, because the worst thing you want to do is submit at 11:58 p.m. when they close at 11:59 p.m. You want to try and get it done early. Then I have a column for status, so I know where I'm at, if it's submitted and pending, if I'm working on it, or if it's been awarded or declined. And then I have the program, the amount requested, amount received. And then kind of, and then the report. So it's also really important if there's reports due for this, which when you get an award, they will typically tell you if there's a report due. With the online applications, that has gotten a lot better for grant writers because their system will alert you when your grant report is due, and they typically do give you quite a bit of time to prepare that. Most funders will also give you that deadline when they send your award or send you the award announcement, and it's critical to make note of that, and also do the same kind of thing as if you're writing the application. Give yourself plenty of time to be able to get the information that you need for that report. And if at all possible, when you do get an award, let the people know who's running the program that you got the award and what you put in the application as far as outcomes. Typically, if you're working with them to create the application, there won't be any surprises. You're not making up your own outcomes. But it's a good reminder for program people who may be juggling a lot of different balls to know what exactly they are going to have to, what information they need to get for you. So here we are. Where do you find funders? So there's a lot of different options, and the great one that Lisa shared with us is wonderful because it's free, and Lisa helps you out and with all the searching, which is fantastic. There are a couple of other options. Grant Station is a good one. If you have an account with TechSoup, you can get it at a discount. Or if you join the Grant Professionals Association, St. Louis chapter, which I'm a member of, I'm on the board, so I would like to plug that. If you join the national GPA, that Grant Station is free to you. And there's also a tremendous amount of resources at GPA on grant writing and management and everything. So it's a really wonderful community. So I can't stress enough, if you're really serious about being a grant writer, to join GPA, because it will really help you with your education. There's one called Grant Spy, which is about $20 a month. Grant Gopher, Basic is free, Pro is $9 a month. I have signed up for many of these, usually the free ones, because I do pay for some. And each one has its own little niche, but I do find that there is not one single search engine that has it all. So it's good to have a couple of different resources. Philanthropy News Digest is a publication that reports on different things in the philanthropic sector, but I also have RFP alerts, and you can go in there. And with all of these, for the most part, you can go in and put your criteria in for your organization, and they will actually send you alerts based on what you're looking for. So you're not getting alerts for, something that doesn't relate to your organization at all. MoCap is a service of the Missouri Foundation for Health, and it's kind of buried on their website, but it's a really cool thing where they will send you a monthly update of funding opportunities. And if you are going for a federal grant, then they have resources there to help you write those federal grants if you don't have any experience with that. So I strongly suggest that you check them out. And Missouri Foundation for Health themselves obviously has their own funding cycles but they're pretty specific. But I found that, and even especially during when the pandemic hit, they put out, I think it was almost weekly, an email to, if you were signed up for it, with COVID related or COVID specific funding opportunities. So that was amazing for not-for-profits. If you're in the education realm, getedfunding.org has a lot of opportunities. That's free. They're government websites. They're a little bit more complicated to navigate, but I mean, if you're in the mental health field, you should be signing up for SAMHSA alerts and things like that. Foundation Search is a very pricey search engine. They only will give you funders that make grants of $5,000 or more. So if you are an organization that can benefit from the little guys, then you're not going to find anything there. Instrumental is a newer one, and that's sort of along the same lines as Foundation Search. They're a little bit more expensive, but for both Foundation Search and Instrumental, and I think Foundation Center Online, but I haven't used them as much recently, they have a lot of other tools and resources. So you can actually use them as your grant management software. You can keep your searches, you can put in, what your contacts were if you submitted a proposal. Some of them will allow you to set up alerts for things like that, for deadlines and things. And some of them will also alert you if there's a change in the funders' deadlines or in their focus area, or if there's any news pertaining to those funders. And then as Lisa was talking about, candid.org has the Foundation Center and GuideStar. And if you're not familiar with GuideStar, that is sort of clearinghouse for all 990s. And that is really a very useful tool when you're researching foundations, because you can find out how much they have in their, how much assets they have, how much they have allocated in the past. It used to be pretty standard, not so much anymore, but many of them will list who they funded and how much. And so you can find out from there. That's a very inexpensive, free way to find out if that funder funds organizations that might be similar to yours.
John.
And then there's relationships. As I alluded to a little bit earlier, you as a grant professional or as a grant writer, you really do need to make and build relationships with your funders. So when you're doing your research and trying to start the relationship, do spend a lot of time on the funders' websites. Some are just a couple of pages, some are 20 or 30 pages, but going through all of that before you start talking to somebody at the foundation will be so good for you, because you won't be asking questions that they're going to say, oh, well, you could have seen that on the website. So really reviewing their website thoroughly, seeing, if they list, a lot of them will list who they've awarded grants to. More and more foundations are highlighting different not-for-profits. So to educate yourself on who they're funding and what kind of projects they're funding will help you be able to determine if they are a good funder to go after. And then also reaching out to your board and volunteers for connections. So this helps a lot with corporate foundations, like local corporate foundations and family foundations. So you may not have a relationship with them, but doing a LinkedIn search or just polling your board and volunteers saying, I'm going after XYZ Foundation. These are the trustees. Does anybody know them? Because, if you don't have a relationship with a foundation, finding that personal connection is your best way to get in the door. Cold calling foundations or just sending an application without any prior contact, I call it throwing a dart at the board. Sometimes you have to go that route, but I would say 95% of the time, it's not going to be effective. Again, like I talked about before, attend panels and events where funders will be, trying to get the opportunity to just, say, hi, this is my organization, give them a business card. Again, I use LinkedIn a lot to try and see if the trustees are linked in with any of the board members or volunteers that I'm connected with. So, if you don't have a LinkedIn account, I would highly recommend doing that, and then connecting with anybody within your organization, volunteers and board that, and even donors that might be on LinkedIn, because it's just another way to be able to know who their connections are. And then there's also, Google searches, just Google News. I think they're actually, you can set up a profile in Google News to alert you if the Kaufman Family Foundation is in the news or something like that. So all these different ways where you can get information about the funders to make yourself more familiar with what their focus and their passion is, and be able to align with what they're trying to do. Okay, and so then here is a grant decision making matrix. So in doing all of this research, there's going to be foundations that are like slam dunk. They absolutely align with our focus. It's a go. There's some that are going to be like, well, it kind of works. And then others that are just square pegs and round holes. So this is a kind of a matrix that you can use to sort of determine whether or not you should be going after this funder. And this is really important, especially if you're wearing a lot of hats. The urge is to go after every single funder that you possibly can, because, there's more, the more you send out, the more you might be able to get a grant. But, time is precious, and especially if you're doing a lot of different things. So you really need to be careful and considerate of yourself, but also your organization, and understand whether or not it's a really good fit. And so I actually have them grouped into different categories of, these are my slam dunkers. I know that we align. I know that their focuses are where our programs are. So we're going for it. And then there's the some that are like, maybe, and then there's the if I get to it kind of column. So those are the ones that might have rolling deadlines, where they don't really have an actual deadline. They might be like a national company, like Aldi Kids, the grocery chain Aldi's has a small grant program, and chance their focus area may align with what you're doing, but you're competing nationally, and so I would put most of your focus on local funders, or ones that are really solidly in your area or in your focus area, and then leave those for if you happen to have time on your hands, which not many people do. So this is just sort of a little, yes, no kind of thing to get you to where you need to be. And then there's the pain scale, which I really like the pain scale, because if it's all fours, then you just got to say no, or if it's a high score. But it really does sort of help you to prioritize, and it also helps you with your leadership, or your clients or your executive director, because they obviously are like, go get the money, but you need to explain to them, well, this is our chances, and this is the amount of work that's going to go into it, and where do you really want me to be spending my time? So I think it's a very useful tool. And there's a lot of different other grant decision-making tools out there. You can Google them, but I kind of like, just obviously the colors on this one, but it's good to have that process. So I'm going to pause again, take a sip of water, and see if there's any other questions that you have on this section before we get into the writing part of it.
Yeah, and we do have a couple of questions. Drink up, Amy. Do you know if there are grants that fund a program that consists of multiple projects? Shall I ask one at a time? Go ahead.
Yeah, so great. So could you read that again?
Yeah, are there grants that fund a program that consists of multiple projects?
Yes, yes, definitely. So I would almost call that a general operating almost. So for instance, one of my clients is the Little Bit Foundation. So we overall serve students in St. Louis City and North County schools who are below poverty level, or the mission is to break down barriers to education. Within the umbrella of Little Bit, we probably have 10 or 12 programs. So that sort of sounds to me like that would be a general operating grant just to fund the whole organization.
Next question, can you solicit corporate sponsorships if you receive grant money, or is it one or the other?
That kind of depends case by case. So there are some corporations who have buckets for sponsorships and buckets for program related work. That's going to be researched on each individual website. I think some of them only want to do sponsorships, but not as much anymore. So unfortunately, well, I don't know unfortunately yet, but so Express Scripts, for instance, before they joined with Cigna, Express Scripts had a bucket for sponsorships and they had a bucket for foundation gifts. And they had two different applications. I'm not sure how that's going to shake out now that they're Cigna, but that was really an easy, like, okay, we can get $2,500 for our trivia night, and we also got X amount of money for our program. So I would say that's not the norm per se. And I do think that a lot of larger corporations are kind of shying away from sponsorships, especially like event sponsorships. And those would really probably come more from personal relationships. But do your research on the website. They will tell you there if they have corporate sponsorships.
All right, here's a good question. If you have a new program, why won't funders offer grant money? And I think this is part of the problem that we see all the time. Those that have money get money,
Yeah,
Yeah, goes with the great new idea, the new kid on the block.
right. So it's like a double-edged sword, and this could be for a new program within an established organization or even a new organization. They, some funders only want to fund new stuff. It's shiny and new and different, and other funders are like, well, prove to me that it works. And I don't know if there's a really good answer to that. It's really more, again, building that relationship with the funder and understanding what their interests are and what their focus is. It's incredibly frustrating. I've been trying to fund a mental health or behavioral health program with Little Bit for years, and we serve 42 schools, and we have 6 schools that have behavioral health because we can only fund a school, put a therapist in a school if we have the funding. So trying to get, and it's really hard when you're starting a new program because you don't have the data. You don't know what the outcomes are going to be. And some funders are totally fine with that and others are not. And so it's really doing the legwork and the homework to understand what they are willing to fund. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and I guess I would interject also, if you're talking about a totally new program and you're a new nonprofit, like you've got the great new idea, but you've got no track record, one possibility is fiscal sponsorship, where you kind of partner with, get under the umbrella of an existing nonprofit, and apply for a grant through them. There are some nonprofits that are set up, that's what they do. I know there's one for artists and art organizations that is a fiscal sponsor. They just want to help you get grants. But the other thing I say sometimes, particularly when someone comes into the library and is like, I'm going to start a nonprofit, I'm going to do this, I'm going to fix this problem. And I'm like, that is awesome. I wonder if anyone else is already working on that problem. Because for people who are passionate about something, they are likely going to feel more fulfilled working on the something directly rather than doing all the stupid paperwork involved in running a nonprofit. So, those are my 2 cents worth on that.
And another suggestion I can make is if you are, for either starting a new organization or it's a new program, do research on the internet to find out what else, if anybody else has been doing it or what outcomes they have had. Because there's studies, there are other organizations across the country that are doing possibly the same kind of work you are or similar, and so you can find what their results were to say this is proven, this is evidence-based. It's what they call it. Do you have an evidence-based program? So if you're based on, well, yeah, we saw that this worked in Detroit and this is what the outcomes were and how many students they served and et cetera, and this is what we're modeling our program after, then there is some basis to what you're doing, that it's been successful in other places. And especially if you could find information from a community that is similar to the one you're serving. So, if it's a high poverty area, then you can look at what's been done in other high poverty areas in the country and what has been successful. We even, at Little Bit, we're constantly doing that because some of the outcomes that we have are hard to prove based on the programs, but there's a lot of other people doing similar work across the country, not in our area, that have had success. And so being able to do that research also, it's another thing that shows that you have thoughtfully prepared your program design and that you have looked into what other people are doing and learned from what they've done and maybe learn from their mistakes. That will help you build a stronger program and a stronger proposal.
Yeah, and Candid, the organization that gives us Foundation Directory Online and that runs GuideStar, they are one of many sources of good research. So I'll drop that link in the chat as well. One question we have, Amy, how much is the GPA membership? And I did put the GPA National and the GPA St. Louis links in the chat also.
Okay. Yeah, I think the national might be 200 and something, and then the local, I think, is $25. And you do have to join national, I think, to be a part of local. However, the St. Louis chapter has monthly meetings. Now we're just starting them up via Zoom. They were lunch meetings with professional development, and you do not have to be a member to attend those. So going through those websites, you'll be able to get information on those and sort of get an idea of what GPA is all about. also.
Cool. All right. So the only other question is one for me. Is there a way to get all the links in this chat emailed? And the answer is probably yes. I will certainly intend to do that. And you are all welcome to poke me in a couple of days if I have not done that. So that's that. Go ahead.
Okay. So now we get to the fun part, the writing. And I found this quote in the book, The Color Purple, which, you find quotes in the most interesting places, but you'd be surprised how good writing matters when you're going after money. And it is very true. Dotting your I's, crossing your T's, making sure your commas are in the right place, all very important in the grant writing. And especially in this day and age, because you're going to be much more severely limited on the space that you have to make your case. Used to be able to, you could write 5 pages worth of wonderful prose, and now you've got 1,000 characters to tell your story, and it's hard. So these are some components of a successful grant proposal. And first of all, it tells your story in an understandable and compelling manner. So you want to, and knowing that program officers are going to be reading thousands of applications, possibly, if not definitely hundreds, you have to make your story stand out in a way that they're going to remember. And again, emphasizing who it will benefit. It's not benefiting your organization. It's what the work you're doing. Who are you helping with your organization or your program? It explains why we need to do the program. So identifying the community need, and with my experience, and what I do a lot, it's, what are the demographics of the community that you're serving? What's the poverty rate? What's the employment rate? What's the graduation rate? All of those things that can give them an idea of what the community is. And you would think that if you're writing for an organization that's in St. Louis, well, surely they know what it is, but not everybody does. So really spelling out very clearly why we need to do the program. Then identifying what it will accomplish. Again, these are outcomes, very clear outcomes. They're specific, they're measurable, they're reasonable, and they're timely. So really focusing on those outcomes. And then highlighting why your work is important, why you're the agency to successfully address this program. And again, it's sort of like what sets yourself apart. And this is particularly important if there are other organizations that are doing similar work to yours. Everybody does something a little bit differently. And so what sets you apart from somebody else? And that also would go along with explaining why you're not collaborating with that organization. So why is it that you're different from everybody else? Then, before you begin writing, very important, read all the guidelines. Read them several times, because some funders, most funders, are very specific about what they want. Also, read through the entire grant before you begin writing. And this is, again, critical. I read through them sometimes 2 or 3 times. And this is particularly helpful if there's sections of an application that you may not be able to answer. So during the first read through, well, I need the budget information from here. I need the program information from here. And so while you're doing all of the basics of the grant, you can send out emails to the people that you need the information from, and that can come at you while you're writing it. So if you don't read it first, then you'll be like sending 47 emails to one person. Oh, and I need this. Oh, and I need this. And then they stop reading them. Or, and it helps you with planning out your time and getting the grant done. And then this is a pro tip. You might already be aware of it, but print or type the grant questions in a Word document. This has been a lifesaver. There are a lot of online applications that don't allow you to save your work, or there could be a glitch in the system. I've had that happen. I'm rolling along and their system glitches out and all of my work is lost. Or you are typing away and you go take a break for lunch and you forget to save your work and you go back and your session is timed out and it's gone. So not only is it important so that you're not spending extra time rewriting things, but I've also found that this is a great way to be able to collaborate with coworkers by typing out all the questions And then you can send it out to your coworkers to make edits or suggestions and things like that. And then you have it all down neatly, and then you can copy and paste it into the online application and send it on its way. And I will tell you, one horror story that I had from early in my career about reading the guidelines. So there are some applications that are still done the old-fashioned way, where you have to write it, type it out on a piece of paper. And it was they wanted everything double spaced, only I think it was 3 pages, double spaced, 1-inch margins, 12-point font. So I was cranking. I had the best proposal. I sent it in and then reread the guidelines again, and I did not see double space. Everything was single spaced. And I was early. I was 2 weeks before the deadline. And I called them up and I said, I am so sorry. I just realized that I did not double space my application. Can I edit it and resend it? And they said, nope, you'll have to wait until next year. So I can tell you, I will never do that again. And I read and reread and reread all the guidelines to make sure, especially if it's a typed out one, that I'm following all of their guidelines.
Well, in this.
So here are some writing tips. Um, in no particular order, and this may seem very basic, and I might repeat myself a couple of times, but please answer the questions. I cannot tell you, I have been on the foundation side reviewing proposals, and I've gone back to proposals from years ago, and people don't answer the questions. So you have this sort of mind disconnect when you're reading the question and you're like, oh, this is exactly what I want to tell them. And then you go back and you're like, oh, that's not really what they were asking. So really with an objective mind, read the question and understand what they're asking you for, and tell them what they want to know, not what you want them to know. Because you will be able to tell them what you want to know, but it needs to be in their context. Be concise while telling your story. Going on and on using very fancy language, things like that, that causes fatigue in reviewers. They be very concise and clear in your story. Avoid jargon and acronyms, especially acronyms. So this is a particularly vexing situation for online applications that are character or word limited, especially if you have a very long name like the Little Bit Foundation. That takes up a lot of characters. So you can say the Little Bit Foundation and then in parentheses TLBF, so that they know that throughout the rest of that section that it's the Little Bit Foundation. However, when you go to a new section, or if it's later on in the proposal, you need to do that again, because you can't, you don't want a reviewer to have to go back to the front and say, oh, what does TLBF mean again? Or if it's SLPS, St. Louis Public Schools, what is St. Louis SLPS again? So make sure that you remind them throughout the application what your acronyms stand for. And that's especially important if you are, like, say you're doing a mental health application and you're talking about dialectical behavior therapy, DBT or CBT. Well, an average person who isn't familiar with those therapies is not going to understand what DBT or CBD is. So you need to make sure that you spell that out. Very important to highlight your positives rather than other negatives. So this is, you can get into a sticky situation if you have another organization that is similar to yours. You don't want to say, well, we do it better than the Y organization. Just focus on what you do and how you do it best. If possible, I love charts and bullets, because it takes a big, huge paragraph full of lots of words and highlights what you want them to know. Not always possible and really not possible at all in online applications, but there are plenty of other opportunities, and I would use it if you can, because there's nothing that makes your eyes cross more than a huge paragraph full of words, and you're trying to find the answer in there. Please be careful if you're cutting and pasting. So all of those tips I gave you earlier about having all of your stuff electronically, make sure that you review those documents regularly and you update them, because you don't want to cut and paste old stats or old data into a new application. If you have the opportunity to do a typed out application, make sure you're using a readable font and point size. Usually the ones without serifs. Times New Roman is really popular, or Arial. There's all sorts of studies on which fonts are easier to read. But don't get fancy. I'm a font lover. I have a million fonts, but I use the basic fonts when I'm doing an application, so it's clear and easy to read. If you are doing a written or a typed out application, make sure you number the pages. Make sure you put the agency information in a footer on every page, so that if it's 6 pages and somebody drops them and they go all over the place, they don't have to figure out how to redo them. Likewise, when you're doing attachments, make sure that the attachment is very clear. So instead of just 501c3 letter, if they're printing this all out, you want to make sure that it is my organization, 501c3 letter, etc. Double check all the attachments that are needed for an application. And that's another part of reading through the whole application beforehand, to know exactly what kind of attachments you're going to need, so that you have enough time to collect those. Typically, all the attachments are listed at the end of the proposal. And so if you're cranking along, you're like, all right, I'm almost finished, it's due tomorrow, and there's 15 attachments, and you may not have all those attachments. So make sure you read through the whole application and get that information first. If you're sending something in by snail mail, make sure the binding is simple. Paper clips, maybe not even staples, because a lot of small family foundations, if they ask you for one copy, they may have 7 trustees, so they have to copy it. And so just doing them a courtesy of them not having to take the staples off and things like that. No, no binders, no fancy binding, stuff like that. They don't want you to spend your money on that. And they might have to be sending it on to other trustees who are not in town. And so it's good to, that would cost them extra money. And then read, reread, and have someone else read your proposal. This is not a luxury that we all have due to time and actually people around. My husband has read many of my proposals. God bless him. If you can, have somebody who's really not familiar with the program or your organization read the proposal, because they will be able to tell you, oh yeah, I really understand what you're trying to say. Also very important, this is something, and I think I'll allude to it later, is something that a funny story that a funder told, but it's really important to reread objectively. If you have the time and you can put your proposal aside for a day or two and go back to it, it is amazing the amount of mistakes you'll find. And it could just be a comma or something misspelled that's not major, but you hate to have those little mistakes in there, because if you've got a grammar or punctuation freak who's reading your proposal, they're going to see it for sure. I have also invested in a program called Grammarly, and they do have a free version of that, and you can run your proposals through Grammarly, and it will tell you where you need commas, if something's a little too wordy. They probably will not tell you that if you're not paying for it, but I have found it very very helpful in making some things more concise, things that I didn't really realize were wordy, and now they're they're pet peeves for me. Like on a regular basis, they would cut that out they would just say regularly. So, little things like that. And that will also truly help you with your character count and word count. Oh, and another tip, and I don't know if anybody else does this, but I grew up with a double space after a period, and apparently you don't have to do that anymore, and it'll save you hundreds of characters. So it's another little tip that I have. So these are some tips that I got out of a book by Martin Title. It's a really good book. I will have that on my list of resources at the end of the presentation. But again, talking about solutions and not problems, and showing that you're familiar with the issues, but emphasizing what you're going to do about it. Not parroting the funder's guidelines when you're linking them to your work. That's a very common question. How does your program or your organization align with our focus areas? Well, just cutting and pasting, we align with your focus on providing education to underserved resource children with our program. Well, be a little more creative than that, so that they know that you really understand what their focus areas are. Fuss over the summary until it sparkles. So there are a lot of applications, even the Missouri Common Grant application that is put out by the Gateway Center for Giving, one of their, they have a long form and a short form, and I believe it's on the long form where they have a project summary. So that is, that's really where you want to make it clear and concise and grabs people attention, and almost writing that before you write the rest of the application, because you don't want to repeat everything that you had in the application. You want it to be different and stand out a lot. I mean, and those are also sometimes summaries that if you're funded, the funder will use that in advertising what they're funding on their websites. Be expected to be asked what you'll do if you only receive part of the request. Some funders are all or nothing. Many of them will do partial requests, and it's good to find that out to begin with too. But have a plan for who else you're going to ask for funding, or how else you're going to fund this, because no funder wants to feel like they are the make it or break it for a program. And then assure repeat funding by reporting what you did and what you didn't do. And this is, again, very important. I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but if you're, especially with a new program, any number of things could happen, like a pandemic, and things don't go the way according to plan. Well, if you typically understand that this is happening well before the end of the program cycle. So getting in touch with the foundation or the program officer is critical to let them know where you're at, what's happening, where you think it's going to go. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be like, thank you for letting me know. Keep carrying on and let us know how it goes. They might even have other resources that could help you achieve your goals, but never surprise them at the report saying we weren't able to fulfill our outcomes because of this. They should know it well before that report happens. So these are additional tips from the funders. Never use an old application. There are a lot of funders that reuse the same application year after year, but it's always good to get the latest and greatest version because they will make tweaks. And I always like it as an opportunity to reach out to the foundation and say, hey, I know on my calendar that your deadline is approaching next month, and I'd like to know if there's any updates to your application. It's just another opportunity to start a conversation. Make sure the budget numbers match those in the proposal. That's very important. And sometimes it's best to make the budget first or fill out the budget template first before you do the narrative, but making sure those budgets match, and also making sure that they match your 990, because they will look at that too. Never submit reports late. That seems like kind of a, duh, but it's good to know. Never cut and paste the same answer into numerous questions. So there are several applications where it sounds like they're asking the same question, and just repeating it is not going to do you any good. You really need to take the time to understand what they're asking. And if you really don't get it, an opportunity for you to reach out to them and say, could you explain this question a little bit more in depth, because it sounds like this one and I want to make sure I'm answering it appropriately. Do not call funder with questions on submission day. These are from funders. This has happened to them. Never forget to thank the funder for a grant. I was in a grant session orientation of a local funder, and she said only 20% of their grantees sent them thank you letters, which I just about fell on the floor. I don't know why they continue to fund those organizations, but thanking them more than once even is really important. And on that same vein, I also thank funders who turn me down, because it is an opportunity to, again, put them in you in their memory, and reach out, another touch. I usually say something like, I appreciate you reviewing our application. Of course, we're disappointed, but we're so pleased to be able to tell you our story, and we look forward to applying again. So, and I do those handwritten, if at all possible, unless I only have an email address. But it's just another way to build that relationship. Do not label your attachments with the funder's name only, because that will be very confusing to them. Make sure if it's, it's the Centene Corporation .budget as your label .your organization, just so that it's very clear. Never ever submit on the last day if you can't help it. Do I follow this rule 100%? No. Is it possible? No. But building that grants calendar and schedule with giving yourself that cushion is really important, especially with big online applications where systems have been known to crash at the very last minute. and you're left out in the cold because you weren't able to get your application in. And I did want to say, I don't know if I had it in here. I'm like running short on time, aren't I?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. We understand if people need to drop off.
Mhm.
That's super cool. And hopefully we successfully recorded this. Who knows? We do have a couple of questions left. So if you can stick around, and Amy, if you have time and want to run through the last, and I hope you're taking a drink now while I'm
No, I should.
buying you time. But I will say right now, and then I'll say it again once we really wrap. Thank you, Amy. Thank you all so much for coming. If you need to go, we understand. Wear a mask, be well, be safe, visit your library. You know the drill. But
Yes.
best of luck to all of you. Back to you, Amy.
Yes. So I'm not going to go through each one of these. This is pretty explanatory. So these are some resources. Again, I don't need to read through them all. They're pretty explanatory. We've talked about a lot of them. So this is for other resources for learning about grant writing. And then these are books that I have read and that are really good for beginning grant writers. I've talked to other grant writers, and these are a lot of the books that they used when they first started out. This is a picture of my puppy when she was a baby. This is Bridie. She is now 11 years old, and she's a little bit paler than that. She's almost a white beagle now. But these are some really good resources for you. And that's it. So we were very close.
Super close. I did also put a link into a book list that I did when Amy did this presentation in 2019. So it has at many of those books, if not all of them, available at your public library. So take a look at that, and I will send all these links out. I'm going to go back and get the last couple of questions we had. Going backwards, Christopher asks, is the intent behind reporting what you did not accomplish to 1, keep the funder informed, 2, convey honesty and transparency, or 3, reinforce the idea that there is still a need, or all of these?
Yes, all 3 of those. Absolutely. And I've actually had a funder recently say that they are not so concerned that we did not meet our goals, because he said it does, first of all, it does take time. You can't necessarily achieve all of your goals in the first year of a program, but it also shows that there's still a need out there and a need for your program. So it's all of those 100%.
Okay, and I'm looking for the other one I saw. It was, okay, what if a neighborhood association is applying for funds for themselves? And this is Tasha, and I assume in that instance, maybe it's a neighborhood association that it doesn't have a 501c3, but I'm not sure about that.
No, they have a 501c3. They just recently applied for a grant. The question was based on about when Amy said that show what you do for the community. What about if it's the community applying for themselves?
I think you describe your community, because you're asking a funder to fund your community association. So explaining exactly what your community is and what the needs of your community are is what you need to do.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, no, thank you, Tasha. Christopher also had the great point that if you click on the 3 little dots in the chat, you have an option to save the chat as a text file. So there is that. I have made a note of all of the links. I was very linky in the chat, so I hope that was not distracting from Amy's awesome presentation. But I have all of your emails because obviously you all got the Zoom invite. So I will send a follow-up with all of those links as well. And look at us, we're 3:31.
Wow.
I thought that was amazing. I may have finally learned this stuff, but I don't plan.
You can take my job.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking time out of your busy days and joining us here again. Be well, happy holidays, check out a book, read a book, stay warm, and yeah, be careful out there.
Yeah, thank you so much for attending. And I'm sorry I don't get to see all of your faces, but hopefully next time.
Thank you.
Yeah. See you in 2021.
Right.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.